Hello and welcome to another edition of News for English Learners. As usual on this channel, we're going to be looking at a news article taken from recent events, and we'll read it together and then go over the individual words and phrases that I've highlighted. I've chosen the ones that I think are a little more challenging and that will help you to expand your vocabulary if you can master them. Reading is a really good way of expanding your vocabulary, at least passively, and then later on you can use those words that you have been exposed to in conversation, and then hopefully they will become part of your active vocabulary. That is the aim of this channel, is to try to help you to expand your vocabulary and therefore be able to express yourself without fear of getting lost or just running out of words. One of the biggest fears of many of my students is a lack of fluency. And what they don't realize is often that lack of fluency is due to their pretty limited understanding of English vocabulary. So I do encourage you to read, check out the other videos on my channel, but of course also read articles online and magazines or books, whatever you can find that's in English. So without further ado, let's crack on with the first paragraph of this article, which is entitled Deepfake Scam Costs Business Millions. In an era where technology has blurred the lines between reality and fiction, a company has found itself falling victim to a deepfake video scam that cost them a whopping $25 million. Deepfakes, the 21st century equivalent to photoshopping, employ a form of artificial intelligence known as deep learning to make up images of events that never occurred. This technology can seamlessly integrate anyone into a video or photo they never actually participated in. It makes it possible to put new words in a politician's mouth, star in your favorite movie, or dance like a professional. So let's talk about the first word we have highlighted here. This is pronounced era. An era is a noun, and in English it refers to a period of time in which certain characteristic events took place. So an era could be distinguished from the previous period of time in history by a particular form of technology that is used. That's why we talk about different ages in human development. We talk about the Neolithic or the Paleolithic. In these eras, the chief technology was stone. That's why it is often referred to as the Stone Age. Then later in human development, we went into a different era, the era where metals were used to make tools and weapons. These eras are often called the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. The current era that we're living in, by some people, is often referred to as the Plastic Age because it seems that plastic is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. But you could certainly also argue that this current era that we're living in could also be defined in terms of the technological development that has taken place. Technology seems to be developing extremely quickly, in fact at an accelerating rate. And as it says in the article, it is beginning to blur the lines between reality and fiction. So that brings us on nicely to the second word here. So this is the regular verb blur, here used as the past participle. And to blur means basically to make something more difficult to see or to make it indistinct. In photography, for example, this is usually considered a bad thing because if the photo is blurred, it means you cannot really see what the subject was because the camera had not focused the image correctly. If an object is moving extremely quickly past you, also, it will be difficult to see and it will also be blurred. In this case, what we're talking about is to blur the lines that exist between reality and fiction. Now, in the past, before we had all of this technology, it was very easy to differentiate between reality and fiction, right? Reality is what we experience as humans every day, and fiction will be something like books or TV or movies. But what the article is arguing here is that those previously very distinct realms are now becoming mixed together to such an extent that it's actually quite difficult for people to tell the difference. How do you know when a video or a photograph is a real event, and how do you know when it is made up, when it is fiction? Those previously distinct lines are becoming blurred. So the next word we have here is this colloquial word here, whopping. This is used as an adjective. It does also exist in the noun form, which is a whopper. And we use this colloquially to talk about things that are unexpectedly big or large. So imagine that you receive an unexpectedly large electricity bill. Maybe you would describe that as a whopper. Or if you are fishing and you catch an unusually big fish, you might describe that as a whopper. In fact, you may have come across this word before if you're a fan of fast food, because there is a certain fast food chain, I believe it's Burger King, that describes their burger as a whopper. In other words, it's the biggest burger on the menu. In this case, the adjective whopping is used to describe the amount of money, the very large amount of money that was stolen or scammed by these criminals. It was a whopping $25 million. Moving on to the next word, we have the first phrasal verb that we've come across in this article is to make up. To make something up. So this is separable. You can put the noun between the verb and the particle. In this case, it is talking about the use of deep learning in order to make up images of events that never occurred. So just by looking at the context, we can kind of figure out the meaning there. Make is a verb that is often used creatively. So you make a sandwich, you make a noise, right? You create a noise out of silence. You make friends, you create new relationships. In this case, what you're creating is something that is not real. When you make something up, you're inventing it. In other words, kind of like lying. Perhaps you were off work and maybe you went to a concert or something, and then when you went back to work, your boss wanted to know why you were off. You might make up a story and tell him that you were sick. Or a teenager might make up a story to tell their parents if they'd been out partying when they were supposed to be studying. In this case, it's the technology that is being used to make up images or videos of things that never happened, right? So it's actually inventing those images out of nothing. So moving on to the next word, here we have this adverb, seamlessly. If we focus first of all on the noun, seam. What is a seam? Well, a seam is basically a join or connection between two objects, and it's often used when we talk about clothes. Most clothes have seams. Those are places where the two or more different bits of material are sewn together. If you think of trousers, usually there's a long seam along each leg. This is where the two parts of the material are, as I said, sewn together. If you think about jeans, then it's pretty obvious. You can really see it prominently. Now, in this case, we are using it with the suffix less. So less usually indicates that something is absent or not there. So something that is seamless will not have a seam, or at least it will be hidden. You won't be able to see it. So if we talk about something that is seamless, it means it tends to flow from one thing to another without any noticeable difference. Equally, if we use the adverb seamlessly, again, it means that things are changing or joining in this case, integrating things together without any noticeable or obvious transition. The transition is very smooth. So in this case, the technology is integrating people into a fictitious scene or scenario in a way that is very difficult to detect. They do it seamlessly. So let's continue with the next paragraph. A company which wishes to remain anonymous was fooled by scammers who used deepfake technology to impersonate a senior executive. The deepfake video instructed the finance department to transfer $25 million to a bank account, mentioning an urgent and confidential investment. I really believed I was talking to my co-workers, said one of the employees, still shaken up by the incident. The mannerisms, the voice, the idiosyncrasies were spot on. It was only when our bank flagged suspicious activity that I realized I'd been taken for a ride. So let's turn to the first word. Here we have the verb to impersonate. This is a regular verb. If we impersonate somebody, it means that we are mimicking them or in some way trying to copy perhaps their voice or their way of behavior. This is actually something that some people do professionally in my country. If you are a professional impersonator, that means that you are essentially dressing and behaving and mimicking the voice of somebody who is famous. And some people do this with famous singers, and they can look and behave and sound almost exactly the same as the genuine person. Probably the most famous example of this would be Elvis impersonators. I mean, there are literally millions of those all over the world. There are other comedians as well who impersonate the voice, in particular, of famous people or personalities. And there are, of course, criminals who impersonate people in order to try to steal money. That is, of course, what happened here. But the difference is that they used the technology to impersonate that person, and they did it so well that the colleagues of this person did not notice. They did not realize that they were being scammed and that they were not talking to the genuine person. So obviously this kind of impersonation is taking it to another level. So the next word we have here is the phrasal verb to shake up. In this case, it's actually used as an adjective, but let's start with the verb on its own, to shake. Well, this is commonly used if you're talking about something moving very vigorously. Think of an earthquake. In an earthquake, the earth shakes sometimes very violently, and everything else that's on it also shakes. We can talk about a cocktail. If you've ever made a cocktail, you know that you need to mix different ingredients together, and then you have to use some kind of container to shake them up, thereby mixing all those ingredients together. There's also a milkshake, similarly non-alcoholic, involves mixing different ingredients together to make a tasty drink. In this case, if you say that you are shaken up, so in other words, you're using it like an adjective, it's actually describing your emotion. But it's kind of making a comparison between the basic verb to shake and that feeling you get when you are very affected by something in a negative way. You are anxious, you're upset, you feel as if you've just been shaken, really. I think that is really the connection here. Imagine if you'd been through an earthquake, right? And you felt the whole earth shaking before you. You would feel really upset and scared and worried. All of those kind of negative emotions is what this phrasal verb used as an adjective is describing. So this person is basically saying that this incident whereby they have lost a lot of money has really affected them emotionally very much, and they feel shaken up. So that brings us on to the next word, flagged. Now this can be used both as a noun and as a verb. As a noun, you may already be familiar with it. If we talk of a flag, what we are essentially referring to is a symbol that represents a country. The United States has the Stars and Stripes flag. The United Kingdom has another flag, which is often referred to as the Union Jack. It's quite a famous flag, and it actually involves superimposing 3 separate flags to make a new one. So there's the flag of England, which is the red cross on a white background. There's the Saltire of Scotland, which is a white diagonal cross on a blue background. And there's also the flag of Northern Ireland. For some reason, the 4th nation of the United Kingdom, Wales, is not actually represented on the flag. But as I said, flags are symbols that represent countries. Now, how does that help us with the understanding using it as a verb? Well, just as a flag can be used to represent something, it can also be used to warn people or to mark something. Think of flags on a golf course. Those flags mark where the holes are. So it gives you something to aim at. Imagine in a war situation that you come across an explosive mine in the ground. You might use a flag to warn other people to stay away from that mine. So in that way, to flag something means to mark or to indicate or to warn somebody about something. In this case, the bank flagged the suspicious activity. They noticed it and they marked it and they warned the company that something might be happening to their bank accounts. So that brings us to the penultimate word, that is realize. This is a regular verb and is sometimes confused with another regular verb, which is notice. The essential difference between these two is that notice is more of a visual awareness, whereas realize is more of a mental awareness or a remembering of something. So imagine that your partner goes to the hairdressers and has a haircut. They change their hairstyle. You would hope that, or she would hope, or he would hope that you would notice that they had changed their hairstyle. Depending on how observant you are, you might notice it or you might not. Realize, on the other hand, as I said, is more to do with remembering or becoming aware mentally. So perhaps you've suddenly realized that you have left your mobile phone at home. You've checked your pocket and it's not there, and you remember that you forgot to pick it up, so you realized. In this case, the employees realized that there was something criminal going on when the bank warned them that there was some suspicious activity. That is when they became aware that this was a scam. In fact, they say here that they had been taken for a ride, which brings us to the last phrase. This is an idiom, and it's, as all idioms, it's very difficult to understand it just by translating the individual words. You have to think of it as a whole and try to understand it in context. If you're taken for a ride, you can see from the context that that means that you've been tricked or deceived in some way. So try not to get taken for a ride. Be careful who you trust and be careful of suspicious activity. So let's move on to the final paragraph. The incident has thrown a spanner in the works for companies who thought their security systems were foolproof. It's clear that with the advent of deepfake technology, businesses are not just fighting off traditional forms of cybercrime, but also newer, more sophisticated threats. Cybersecurity expert Dr. Jane McKinnon warns, deepfakes are becoming increasingly convincing and accessible. Businesses need to beef up their security protocols and invest in AI detection tools to sniff out these deepfakes. So, let's turn to the first phrase we have highlighted here, which is to throw a spanner in the works. So probably the first thing to understand is, what is a spanner? Well, a spanner is a kind of tool, and a tool is an object that is designed for a specific purpose. For example, a saw is a tool that's designed for cutting wood or metal. A hammer is a tool that is designed for hitting things, chiefly nails. And a spanner is a tool that is designed for loosening or tightening nuts and bolts. Nuts and bolts are pieces of metal that you turn and they hold things together, essentially. So as a tool, what would happen if you threw a metal spanner into the workings of a machine? Well, probably that wouldn't be a good idea. You can imagine if you threw the spanner in the works, it would destroy the machine or break the machine. And that is the sense in which this idiom is used. If you throw a spanner into the works of a machine, you're going to disrupt it or disturb it. And this incident has disturbed the peace and tranquility that companies had previously, right? This incident has shown that their systems are vulnerable to this kind of attack. So that's what the idiom means, really. We use it when you're talking about an event or an incident that in some way is disruptive and causes new problems or trouble. When things are going smoothly, we often say they're plain sailing. But if there is a problem or a hiccup along the way, you can use this idiom to describe that. So that brings us on to the next word we have here. This is the adjective foolproof. A fool is essentially somebody who is perhaps stupid or not intelligent or easily tricked. Sometimes we would say gullible. And the suffix proof you will often see attached to other words such as water. Waterproof shoes are shoes that are resistant to water, to rain. If something is soundproof, that means the sound cannot escape. Perhaps if you have a room where you practice the drums, you might want to make it soundproof so you don't disturb the neighbors. So we can see, therefore, that this suffix proof basically means to prevent or protect. And if something is foolproof, you can kind of understand it as being protected against fools. A fool, or somebody who's not very wise, not very intelligent, might easily break something if they are playing around with it. But if it's foolproof, it will be impossible to break or impossible to damage. If you have a foolproof plan, it means it's impossible for it to go wrong. It's so simple, it's so clear that it's foolproof. Even a fool will be able to carry out the plan. In this case, the companies thought that their security systems were foolproof, that they were impossible to penetrate or to break. But in fact, that turned out to be not true with this new development of this new AI technology. So let's move on to the next word. This is the phrasal verb fighting off. If you are fighting off somebody or something, it essentially means you are defending yourself, usually in a physical way, but not necessarily. For example, in this case, obviously, we're not talking about physical fighting, but we are talking about defense. If you are a company that has networks online, you will obviously need to have very strong defenses to fight off all of the hackers and scammers who are going to try to attack your systems. And in this article, what it is saying, therefore, is that the attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated using these new technologies, and it's becoming more and more difficult to fight them off, to keep them at bay, to defend themselves. Because those, not only from the traditional forms of cybercrime, like hacking and phishing, but also like this kind of sophisticated trick where you're using AI to trick employees. So if you were attacked by an animal, equally, you have two options, essentially. You could try to run away and escape, or you could try to fight it off. Maybe if you have some kind of a weapon, you might be able to do that, depending on how ferocious the animal is, of course. So the next and penultimate word is another phrasal verb, to beef up. So this is a separable phrasal verb, so you can beef something up. In this case, the expert is advising companies to beef their security up. What does it mean? Well, it essentially means to make something stronger or more resistant. I suppose it comes from the association with the meat. If you eat a lot of beef, you're going to be big and strong. And in fact, the animal itself, the cow that provides the beef, is also generally a muscly animal, big and strong. So you've got that association that creates the meaning here of to strengthen something, to make it more resistant to a security threat. It can also mean to boost as well. Like if a company says, we need to beef up production of the product, that means that they need to increase the quantity of product that they are producing. So moving on to the last word here, we have another phrasal verb, the final one for today. This is to sniff out. Now, the verb sniff is related to your nose. If you are sniffing, generally you are inhaling through your nose. Sometimes if people have nasal congestion, they sniff a lot. They're constantly doing that, making that irritating sound. Certain animals, when they are smelling things, when they are looking for scents, will sniff. They will sniff your hand. Your dog will sniff your hand, and your cat too. So if you are sniffing, you are inhaling. But what about sniff out? How is that different? Well, I guess it comes from the association with animals. As I mentioned, dogs often sniff you or objects around you. And in fact, dogs are used to find certain objects or even criminals. They're used by the police because their sense of smell is so good, it's so sensitive, that they can easily sniff out, so they can find criminals or objects just by using their sense of smell. So that is the sense in which this is used. If you are detecting something, you are sniffing it out. And the idea in the article is that as well as AI being a threat to security, it could also be the means by which these companies can defend themselves. We could perhaps use the AI to detect or to sniff out the fake pictures or the fake videos. And there are actually companies working on this right now, trying to make systems that are capable of sniffing out the fake from the real, to determine which is real and which is fake. We'll have to wait and see to see how successful they are, but I'm sure that's an important development. So there we have it. That's the end of today's article. I thank you for staying with me till the end. If you have, don't forget to click like. And if you haven't already done it, please subscribe and check out my other videos on the channel. Until next time, I'll say goodbye.